Dad, perfect revenge. The night I found out I wasn't invited to my own son's rehearsal dinner, I was standing in my garage workshop in Phoenix, Arizona looking at the check I'd just written for $12,000, the final payment for Timothy's wedding at that fancy resort in Scottsdale. I'd already paid for everything else. The venue, the catering, the photographer, the open bar, everything he and Brittany had picked out from those glossy wedding magazines she kept showing me. My name is Victor Coleman. I'm 58 years old and I truly believed I was doing right by my son. My late wife Margaret would have wanted to see this day. She always said Timothy was going to accomplish great things. He just needed the right support to get started. I called Timothy to let him know the payment had gone through. "Hey son," I said when he answered. "I just paid the Scottsdale resort. Everything's set for Saturday." I could hear music playing in the background, mixed with laughter and the sounds of people enjoying themselves. "Oh Dad, thanks," he said, but his voice sounded distracted. "That's awesome. So, what time do you want me there Friday?" I asked. "For the rehearsal dinner? I figured I could come by early and help set up if you need anything." There was a long pause. Then another voice came on the line. "Brittany. My soon-to-be daughter-in-law. Sweet as honey, but as sharp as a blade when she wanted to be." "Hey Victor," she said, taking the phone. "Actually, the rehearsal dinner is just for the wedding party and immediate family. You know, we're keeping it intimate and meaningful." I shifted the phone to my other ear. "Immediate family? Brittany, I'm his father. I am immediate family." Right, she replied in that calm, patient tone people use when they think you're missing something obvious. "But it's really just the people in the ceremony, Timothy's groomsmen, my bridesmaids, and our parents who are walking us down the aisle." Our parents who are walking us down the aisle. But I was supposed to be walking him down the aisle. I was his father. I was the one who taught him how to swing a hammer, how to read blueprints, and how to be a man who kept his word. "I'm walking Timothy down the aisle," I said slowly. "Actually," Brittany replied, while I could hear Timothy saying something in the background, "we decided my dad and Timothy's Uncle Carl will do it together. You know, since Margaret isn't here, it feels more balanced that way." Uncle Carl, Margaret's brother, who lived in Tucson and had probably seen Timothy only 3 times a year. He was going to walk my son down the aisle, not me. Not the father who had spent countless weekends teaching Timothy everything I knew about construction, about building things with your own hands, and about the satisfaction that comes from honest work. "Timothy," I said, my throat tightening, "is that true?" He came back on the line, his voice quiet. "Dad, it's just, Brittany's family is really traditional, and they thought it would be more meaningful if I didn't." I didn't hear the rest. The garage suddenly felt too small, too silent, and too full of every project Timothy and I had started together when he was a kid. The workbench where I'd taught him how to use tools. The corner where we built his very first bookshelf. The spot where he'd sit and watch me work on engines, asking a million questions about how every piece fit together. "Dad," Timothy said, "you understand, right? It's not personal. It's just, this is our day, and we want everything to be perfect. Our day. The day I'd been saving forever since he was born. The day I'd cashed out part of my 401k to help pay for. The day I'd sold Margaret's car to cover the last-minute upgrades Brittany insisted on." "Sure," I said, "I understand. Great, so we'll see you Saturday at the ceremony, 3 o'clock sharp. Love you, Dad." The call ended. I stood there in my garage holding a silent phone, staring at the tools I'd collected over 35 years in construction. The same tools I'd used to build a good life for my family. The same tools I'd used to teach my son the value of honest work. Tools that, apparently, didn't matter anymore. I walked back into the house and sat down at the kitchen table, where my financial records were spread out. Since Margaret passed away 3 years earlier, I'd been keeping careful track of every dollar. When you're living on a contractor's pension and Social Security, every penny counts. But as I looked over the numbers, now really looked at them, I finally saw something I'd been too guilty to admit. In the 3 years since Timothy met Brittany, I'd given them $47,000. There was the $15,000 I'd loaned him to start his graphic design business, the one that never really got off the ground. He'd come to me with an entire presentation about modern marketing, digital strategies, and social media. I hadn't understood half of what he was talking about, but he was so enthusiastic, so convinced it was going to succeed. The business closed after 8 months. Then there was the $8,000 when his car broke down and he said he needed something reliable for client meetings. A nearly new Honda because he believed it would improve his professional image. I figured dependable transportation was important for any business. Then came the $6,000 when they suddenly had to move out of their apartment because of mold issues. I never saw the apartment. I never saw any proof of mold. But Timothy said they had to leave immediately for Brittany's health. The $12,000 for the resort wedding, along with dozens of smaller amounts over the months. $500 here, $1,200 there. There was always some emergency that couldn't wait. Car insurance, medical bills, security deposits, urgent vendor payments, $47,000. That was more than I earned in an entire year when I first started swinging a hammer at 23. It was the down payment Margaret and I had spent 4 years saving for to buy our house. It was Timothy's entire college fund, built $75 at a time over 18 years. Every single payday, without fail. I picked up my phone. 3 text messages from Timothy. All sent after midnight. Dad, you not mad, right? Brittany's family is just particular about these things. Can't wait for you to see me walk down the aisle with Uncle Carl and Mr. Wells. Uncle Carl. The man who couldn't tell a Phillips head screwdriver from a flathead? Uncle Carl, who had never spent a summer teaching Timothy how to frame a wall or wire an outlet. Uncle Carl, who was stepping into the place I'd earned through years of being there, showing up, and being the father who built things with both his hands and his heart. My hands trembled as I set the phone back down. Something inside me had broken, not all at once, not with a loud crash, quietly, finally. Like an old rope that's been fraying for years before giving way on its very last strand. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. The joint checking account I'd created for Timothy's emergencies showed a balance of $2,100. It should have been closer to $8,000. I clicked on the recent transactions and my stomach sank. An $800 withdrawal, car insurance emergency. A $1,500 withdrawal, medical bill, can't wait. A $2,200 withdrawal. Urgent wedding vendor deposit. All within the past month. All within the past month. All while I was writing checks to pay for the wedding. All while they were making plans to replace me with Uncle Carl, as though I were some distant relative who might embarrass them at their elegant resort wedding. I called my bank. First National. This is Kevin. How can I help you? Hi Kevin, this is Victor Coleman. I need to remove someone from my joint checking account. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of typing. All right, Mr. Coleman, let me pull up your account. May I ask who you'd like to remove? My son. Okay, sir, I'll need to verify some information, and then I'll walk you through the process. I spent the rest of that morning making phone calls. The bank. My credit union. My investment advisor. Every account Timothy had access to. Every automatic transfer I'd set up to make his life easier. I shut them all down. By the time I finished, my hands were steady for the first time in hours. That afternoon, I drove across town to a coffee shop and ordered a black coffee I didn't even want. I just needed to be somewhere other than my house. Somewhere that didn't echo with Margaret's absence and Timothy's betrayal. Somewhere I could think clearly about everything I'd just realized. The coffee shop was mostly empty. A few college students sat working on laptops. An older woman quietly read a paperback novel. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. Not discovering that their own children had been draining them dry while planning to humiliate them in front of everyone. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone rang. Timothy. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching it vibrate across the table. Part of me wanted to ignore the call. But I needed to hear what he had to say. Dad? His voice was tense. Angry. What did you do? What do you mean? The bank called me. They said you removed me from your accounts, all of them. That's right. Why would you do that? He wasn't really asking. He was demanding an explanation. As though I owed him one for taking control of my own money. Because I'm not a bank, Timothy. I'm your father. I don't understand what that's supposed to mean. I carefully set my coffee back on the table. The woman with the paperback glanced in my direction, probably wondering why an older man was having a family argument in the middle of a coffee shop. It means I'm done being treated like an ATM with a heartbeat. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. We needed that money. My business is just getting started, and we have expenses. So do I. You're retired? What expenses could you possibly have? I laughed. A bitter laugh that surprised even me. I'm 58, Timothy, not dead. I have a mortgage, utility bills, medical expenses, and car insurance. I have a life that extends beyond writing checks every time you have another emergency. You've got plenty of money, he fired back. You're just being petty because of the rehearsal dinner thing. Petty. The word landed like a slap across my face. The rehearsal dinner thing. You mean the part where you replaced me with Uncle Carl? Where you decided the father who taught you everything about building, fixing things, and being a man wasn't good enough to walk you down the aisle? It's not about whether you're good enough. It's about what Brittany's family wants. They're traditional. Traditional? I stood and walked toward the window. I've given you $47,000 over the last 3 years, Timothy. $47,000, that's not tradition. That's a down payment on a house. That's a brand new truck. That's 2 years of my pension. Silence filled the other end of the line. The college kids were staring now too. I turned away from them and lowered my voice. And you know what? I continued. I was happy to do it. I wanted to help because you're my son and I love you. But I'm not going to pay for the privilege of being treated like I don't matter. Dad, you're overreacting. No, I said. I'm finally reacting the way I should have. What's that supposed to mean? It means the bank is closed, Timothy. Permanently. I could hear his breathing become quick and shallow. You can't do this, not now. The wedding is in 2 weeks. The wedding is already paid for, I replied. Every single penny. You'll still have your perfect day with Uncle Carl and all of Brittany's traditional family. We need money for the honeymoon, he said, his voice softening into a plea. We were counting on you to help with that. You always said you'd help us get started. I've given you $47,000 in 3 years, Timothy. You're already started. More than started. 47,000? He sounded genuinely stunned. That can't be right. It's right. I have the records. Every check, every transfer, every check, every transfer. Every time you called with another emergency that couldn't wait. Another long silence followed. I could picture him sitting there, maybe with Brittany beside him telling him what to say next. Dad, he finally said, his voice colder now. Different. If you cut us off, you're going to regret this. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. It wasn't the voice of the little boy I'd taught to use a level. It wasn't the teenager who used to spend weekends helping me on construction jobs for extra spending money. This was someone else, someone calculating. Is that a threat? It's a fact, he replied. We'll handle this our way. The line went dead. I stood in that coffee shop holding my silent phone while the people around me pretended not to notice the old man whose family was falling apart in public. 3 days passed. Quiet days. I worked on my truck. I organized the garage. I fixed the loose board on the back porch. Ordinary tasks that made me feel as though I was reclaiming pieces of my life. Small repairs that actually stayed fixed, unlike the relationship with my son, which I'd been trying to patch together for years. Thursday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He wore the kind of polished smile that never reached his eyes. Victor Coleman? Yes. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. You've been served. My stomach dropped. Served with what? A lawsuit. Your son and his fiancée are suing you for breach of oral contract and promissory estoppel. They're seeking damages for financial commitments they claim you promised but failed to provide. He handed me the envelope, turned around, and walked away without another word. I stood in the doorway holding the envelope as though it were contaminated. A lawsuit. My own son was suing me. I went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table. My hands trembled as I opened it. Complaint for breach of contract. Plaintiffs, Timothy Coleman and Brittany Wells. Defendant, Victor Coleman. I skimmed through the pages, my vision beginning to blur. The defendant made repeated verbal promises to provide financial support for the plaintiff's business ventures and honeymoon expenses. The plaintiffs relied upon those promises in good faith, making financial commitments they are now unable to fulfill. The defendant willfully and maliciously withdrew the promised support, causing substantial financial and emotional distress. Amount sought $15,000 for honeymoon expenses, business startup costs, and emotional distress. I read it 3 times before the words finally sank in. They weren't just asking me to pay for their honeymoon. They were demanding damages because I had stopped letting them bleed me dry. Emotional distress for refusing to let them keep treating me like a walking wallet. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Coleman, this is Nancy Foster, attorney at law. I'm calling because a colleague mentioned your situation. Do you have legal representation? How did you know about this? It's a small legal community, she said. Cases like yours are more common than you might think. Have you been served yet? About 20 minutes ago. Would you be willing to meet with me this afternoon? The consultation is free. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Nancy Foster in her downtown office. She looked to be around 50, with sharp eyes behind a pair of reading glasses. She had the kind of calm, steady presence that made you feel like everything might actually turn out all right. She read through the complaint, making notes as she went, her expression never changing. Finally, she looked up. Well, she said, this is textbook financial elder abuse disguised as a contract dispute. Elder abuse, I'm 58. You're a widower with adult children making financial demands while threatening legal action. That's abuse. She leaned forward. Tell me everything. Start at the beginning. So I did. I told her about helping with the business, paying for the wedding, the joint accounts, being excluded from the rehearsal dinner, Uncle Carl replacing me, the threat, everything. Do you have documentation? She asked after I finished. Everything. Bank statements, canceled checks, text messages. I keep detailed records. For the first time, she smiled. Good. Because we're not just going to defend this lawsuit, we're going to dismantle it. She pulled out a legal pad. Here's what's going to happen. They're claiming you made promises. But a promise to give someone a gift isn't legally enforceable unless it's in writing. And even if it were, you've already given them tens of thousands of dollars. Any reasonable person would conclude you more than fulfilled any moral obligation. What about the emotional distress claim? Desperation, Nancy replied. People who file lawsuits like this are usually in financial trouble and see a parent as an easy target. They expect you to give in because you love your son and don't want the embarrassment. I'm not giving in, I can see that. She jotted down another note. We'll file a response denying every claim, then we'll file a counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process. If they really want to pursue this, we'll demand they repay every dollar you've given them over the past 3 years. Over the next week, Nancy and I prepared our case. Every bank statement from the past 3 years. Every text message where Timothy asked for money. Every email where I agreed. Every withdrawal from the joint account. The paper trail was devastating. We organized everything into a thick binder with tabs and highlighted sections. Nancy called it our nuclear option. The following Tuesday, I was replacing a bathroom faucet when a car pulled into the driveway. Timothy's Honda. He got out wearing sunglasses even though the sky was overcast and walked toward me as if he owned the sidewalk. We need to talk, he said. I have a lawyer now, Timothy. You should speak with her. I'm not here about the lawsuit. He folded his arms. I'm here about the wedding. My chest tightened. What about it? He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were red, though I couldn't tell whether it was from anger or something else. Brittany and I have been talking, he said. We've decided it would probably be better if you didn't come. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Don't come to your wedding. It's going to be awkward with everything that's happening. The lawsuit, you cutting us off, making this whole thing about money. We don't want that kind of energy on our special day. Making it about money? The son who was suing me for $15,000 was accusing me of making everything about money. Timothy, you're the one suing me for $15,000. Because you promised, he snapped. You've always promised you'd be there for me. And now, when I actually need you, you're being selfish. Selfish. There was that word again. I've given you nearly $50,000, and we're grateful, he said, but the tone in his voice said otherwise. But that doesn't mean you get to control our lives. This is our wedding, our day, our decision. I paid for it. So what? You think that gives you the right to judge us? To embarrass us? I haven't caused a scene. I'd simply stop saying yes to every demand. He stepped closer. You know what? Fine. Keep your money. Keep your money. Keep your boundaries. But don't expect to be part of our lives anymore. Brittany's family warned me about this. They said you'd try to manipulate me, use money to control me. I didn't believe them, but I was wrong. Every word landed like a physical blow. I've never tried to control you. Then why are you doing this? Why are you ruining the happiest time of my life? Because I'm your father, not your piggy bank. He stared at me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or recognition. But it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Don't come to the wedding, he said again. I'll have your name removed from the guest list. He turned and walked back to his car. I stood in my driveway with my tools still in my hands, watching my son drive away from the house where I'd raised him, where I'd taught him everything I knew about being a man. That night, I called Nancy. He uninvited me from the wedding. I'm sorry, Victor. Don't be. I think it clarifies things. How so? Now I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Nancy's voice became firmer. Then let's give them the fight they asked for. 2 weeks later, we stood in a courtroom. It wasn't some grand courtroom like you see in the movies, just a small civil courtroom with fluorescent lights and worn carpeting. Timothy and Brittany sat on one side with their attorney. Nancy and I sat on the other. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, Judge Patricia Reynolds. She wore reading glasses on a chain and carried herself like someone who had already heard every excuse imaginable. Timothy's lawyer spoke first. He was young, overly confident, the kind of attorney who probably billed by the syllable. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of promissory estoppel. Mr. Coleman made repeated, specific promises to finance his son's business ventures and honeymoon expenses. The plaintiffs relied on those promises in good faith and are now facing financial hardship because of his capricious decision to withdraw his support. Capricious. As though refusing to let someone keep bleeding you dry was nothing more than a whim. He presented their evidence. Text messages where I'd written, "Don't worry, I'll help." Emails where I'd said, "I want you to have the wedding you're dreaming of." Voicemails where I'd told Timothy, "I've got you covered." Every one of them taken out of context, every one twisted to resemble a binding contract. Then Timothy took the stand. He wore a dark suit with his hair neatly slicked back, looking every bit like the responsible young man I'd raised. My father has always been my rock, he said, his voice trembling just enough. After Mom died, he promised he'd take care of me, that I'd never have to worry. He dabbed at his eyes with a tissue. My business partner and I planned our startup expansion based on Dad's promise. We booked our honeymoon, made financial commitments, and then, without warning, he cut us off. He said terrible things about Brittany and accused us of taking advantage of him. He looked directly at me. I don't understand what happened to my father. It's like he became a different person. Then Nancy rose, calm, composed, precise. Your Honor, the plaintiffs would have this court believe that Mr. Coleman abandoned his son. Nothing could be further from the truth. She opened the binder. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Coleman has given the plaintiffs $47,000 not loaned, but given with no expectation of repayment and no written agreement. She walked Judge Reynolds through every document, every check, every bank transfer, every single time I'd said yes. This is not a father who failed to support his son, Nancy said. This is a father who was systematically exploited until he finally decided enough was enough. Then it was my turn to testify. I told the judge about the rehearsal dinner, about Uncle Carl replacing me, about the unauthorized withdrawals, about the threat Timothy made after I closed the accounts. Your Honor, I said, I would have given my son anything. In many ways, I already did. But the moment I stopped, he sued me and uninvited me from his wedding. That's not a son looking for his father's support, that's someone who sees me as a resource to be mined. The courtroom fell silent when I finished. Judge Reynolds removed her glasses. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your clients received $12,000 for their wedding, $15,000 for a business venture, and numerous additional payments totaling $47,000 over the course of 3 years. And now they are suing Mr. Coleman for another $15,000 because he declined to pay for their honeymoon? Timothy's attorney shifted uneasily. Your Honor, the promises were made, alleged promises, the judge interrupted. Verbal expressions of support are not legally binding contracts, particularly when the defendant has already provided substantial financial assistance that far exceeds any reasonable expectation. She turned her attention to Timothy and Brittany. This court categorically denies the plaintiff's claim. Relief washed over me, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by both the timing and the nature of this lawsuit. Filing a claim for emotional distress while simultaneously excluding the defendant from a wedding he financed strongly suggests this action was brought in bad faith. She turned toward Timothy's attorney. I'm ordering the plaintiffs to pay Mr. Coleman's legal fees. The gavel came down. Afterward, in the hallway, Nancy shook my hand. You did it, Victor! Through the courtroom doors, I could see Timothy and Brittany standing together, arguing in low, angry voices. Their lawyer was packing up his briefcase with quick, frustrated movements. Do you think he'll ever understand? I asked Nancy. She looked in their direction, then slowly shook her head. Some people never do. But that isn't your responsibility anymore. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Phoenix afternoon. The air carried the scent of desert rain and possibility. Over the next several months, my life began to change in small but meaningful ways. I started volunteering at a trade school, teaching young men the skills I'd spent 35 years mastering. I found a new kind of family in my students. They appreciated what I had to offer. They valued hard work and honest craftsmanship. I traveled. I drove to the Grand Canyon. I visited my old army buddy in Colorado. I enjoyed good barbecue in Texas. For the first time in a long while, I was living for myself, not for Timothy's expectations or anyone else's demands. 6 months later, I received a letter. A plain envelope. Handwriting I recognized immediately. Dad, Brittany and I separated last month. Turns out she was only interested in me as long as the money kept coming. My business failed too. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm beginning to understand what happened. I treated you as though your only value was what you could provide. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I finally see it. I see what I did. I see what I lost. I'm sorry, Dad. Timothy. I read the letter twice, then I folded it and placed it in my desk drawer. Maybe I'd write back someday. Maybe I wouldn't. For now, I was at peace with the silence. That evening, I stood on my back porch, watching the sunset wash the desert mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Margaret would have loved that view. She would have loved the peace. I thought about her often and wondered what she would have made of everything that had happened. I believed she would have been proud. Not because of a lawsuit or the pain it caused, but because I had finally learned to value myself. I'd built a good life with these hands. I'd raised a son the best way I knew how. And when that wasn't enough, I learned to build something else. Boundaries. Self-respect. A future that belonged to me. My name is Victor Coleman. I'm 58 years old, and I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to destroy you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone where you end and they begin. For the first time in years, I sleep peacefully at night, knowing I did the right thing. My life belongs to me. And that's exactly how it should be. I learned that enabling someone's destructive behavior isn't love. It's becoming part of their failure. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in the problem. Real strength isn't measured by how much you're willing to give or how much you're able to endure. It's knowing when to say no and having the courage to walk away from people who mistake your kindness for weakness.